Now, most of you know that I've been highly critical of a lot of the Deontay Wilder fanboys, the hardcore Wilder fanatics. And I've pointed out their complete detachment from reality when it comes to their support of this man. But on the other end of the spectrum, you've got a group of Deontay Wilder detractors. Some might even say Deontay Wilder haters. And these people appear to be just as detached from reality as the Wilder fanboys are. And this is no disrespect to the people I'm referencing or I'm about to reference now. But I've had several people in my boxing group over the past week or so. Again, no disrespect to you guys, but you've been posting videos of Deontay Wilder hitting the pads. And in fact, a few weeks ago, there was somebody who posted a video of Deontay Wilder hitting the bag. And all that people are saying is Wilder looks terrible on the pads. His technique is awful. One person even made a post today in my Facebook boxing group saying that Deontay Wilder has the worst technique. He's the technically worst world champion in boxing history of any weight division. This is what the person said in their post. Now, to say something like that, I mean, to be fair, he said arguably the technically worst world champion in boxing history. To say something like that shows that you don't know boxing to come out with a statement like that. And, you know, regardless of people knowing boxing or not knowing boxing, when people are banging on about how bad they think Deontay Wilder looks on the pads and how bad they think his technique is, the inference is Wilder's got no chance against Tyson Fury because he's so poor technically. As if the technically superior guy always wins boxing matches. As if the guy who looks better on the pads is clearly going to be the guy who wins in the ring. This is the inference that people are making with these kind of posts criticizing Deontay Wilder on the pads. I've been involved in boxing, both when I used to box myself and even till this very day, I work with younger guys in the gym, helping them train and progress in their careers. Okay? Amateur and some young professionals now. And in all the time that I've been involved in boxing, as a fan, as a participant, as somebody who helps people train and stuff like that, which is over 25 years, I can't for the life of me understand why people think Deontay Wilder looks so bad on the pads. To me, he looks decent. Have I seen heavyweights look more impressive on the pads? Yes. But have I seen heavyweights who look worse on the pads? Yes. Deontay Wilder does not look that bad on the pads at all. I don't know why people are making such a song and dance about him looking terrible on the pads. What do people want him to do? And as I mentioned before, I mean, in fact, let me carry on from that. What do people want Wilder to do? Throw 10-punch combinations? Like triple left hooks followed by a right hand and then do the Ali shuffle and a backflip? I mean, what do people want him to do? Deontay Wilder is what he is. He's a sharpshooter. He's a gunslinger. He's a guy who throws powerful shots from long range. He's not a guy who is a prolific combination puncher. If you get a combination out of Wilder, it's going to be a 1-2. That's about it. Occasionally you might get a 1-2-3, and I'm talking about in an actual fight, not on the pads. You might get a 1-2-3 from him. He doesn't have the, how can I describe it? I don't want to say he doesn't have the coordination, because he's well coordinated enough to land his right hand accurately. Okay. But he doesn't appear to have the hand-eye coordination to be able to put multiple combinations together in quick succession and maintain his shape. Okay, he doesn't appear to be able to do that. And so what does Deontay Wilder do when he gets in the ring? He doesn't try to do that. He sticks to what he's good at, which is the 1-2, the straight shots. And another thing which people underestimate about Deontay Wilder is the guy don't get hit that much. So for all your criticism, I saw one person say, oh, Wilder looks so open when he's on the pads. Well, the proof is in the pudding. You can look open on the pads, but when you get in the ring, are you getting hit a lot? With, in the case of Deontay Wilder, no, he's not getting hit a lot. The guy does not get hit much. So it's not, a reflection in terms of what you see on the pads of what you get in the ring. Yeah, he might look open. Is he easy to hit? He can move away with his feet. He can lean back from shots as he does. Plenty of fighters look open on the pads. Muhammad Ali used to look open on the pads. Vitaly Klitschko used to look open on the pads. In fact, I'm not even sure if Ali ever did pads, but he used to look open in sparring and training and shadow boxing. But Klitschko look open on the pads. Vitaly particularly. So people often read way too much into pad work and bag work. Way too much. And it tends to be people who don't know that much about boxing or who are relatively new boxing fans. Okay. Some of them might be old school boxing fans, but they're people who have never really studied boxing in any great depth. Yeah. And I'll give you some examples here. All right. Where we at? Brandon Rios. Now this is a guy who is notorious for what? Having a very good work rate. Okay. One thing, Brandon Rios, the way he fights is he fights with his hands up. If you see Brandon Rios on the pads, he's got his hands up, right? But Brandon Rios has got a terrible defense. Brandon Rios gets hit way more than someone like Deontay Wilder. Way more. But yet Wilder is quote unquote open, but yet he hardly gets hit. Rios has his hands up and he gets hit all the time. So some people seem to be looking at pad, oh, he's not getting his hand back quick enough after he throws this shot. Like, people, it's not as simple as who has their hands up when they're hitting the pads. Deontay Wilder's an athletically gifted fighter, and he can use his feet to get out the way. He can lean back from shots. Let me ask you the question. Who looks more impressive on the pads, Deontay Wilder or Luis Ortiz? Most people are going to say Luis Ortiz. But Wilder still beat him. Who looks more impressive on the pads? Deontay Wilder or Gerald Washington? You go watch Gerald Washington on the pads. He looks pretty good. He still lost to Deontay Wilder. You can go and apply that to many of Deontay Wilder's previous opponents, and you're going to get the same situation where they look better on the pads, but they still lose when they get in the ring. Who looks pretty on the pads is not the be-all and end-all, people. I don't know why people are obsessed with criticizing Deontay Wilder's techniques in training. And again, he doesn't even look that bad. And another thing is, a lot of the time you see fighters hitting the pads with their trainers. And what they're doing is more of an athletic exercise, because it's not really representative of how the action is going to unfold in the ring. I've heard Errol Spence talk about this actually, where guys are throwing 10 punch combinations on the pads and moving this way and that way and doing back flips and front flips. I mean, yeah, it's great as an athletic exercise, but is that representative of what's actually going to happen in the ring? No, it's not. Particularly not at heavyweight. When you're dealing with a guy in Wilder who's 6'7", Tyson Fury's like 6'8", 6'9". You really think these guys are going to be landing 10 punch combinations on each other with regularity throughout the fight? Hell no. With these guys, it's going to be 1-2s. That's what it's going to be. Jabs and single shots and 1-2s. That's the reality of heavyweight boxing for the majority of a fight. Especially if it's a long fight. When shots land, it'll be the odd single shot here and there or a 1-2 when you're dealing with heavyweights of this size. Yeah, if somebody gets hurt, then you might have a situation where somebody gets unloaded upon. Pause. That sounded dodgy. All right. Pause. Occasionally you might get that going on, all right? When someone gets hurt, someone empties the tank. But for the most part, it's going to be single shots and 1-2s. And that's what Deontay Wilder, a lot of the time in his pad sessions, is training for. In this particular, and I'm sure Wilder does different kinds of pad sessions where he throws more shots, other pad sessions where he throws less shots. In this pad session, he's concentrating on throwing with power and trying to replicate the kind of rhythm that he expects from Tyson Fury in the fight. That's what his trainer's doing. He's throwing his hands up in front of Wilder, trying to mess with his vision, by throwing his hands up and waving them around and stuff like that. And then Wilder's coming in with like fast right hands, single shots or left hooks, jabs. This is how Wilder fights. So they're trying to replicate that in the ring, in this pad session. That's what they're doing. Another example, right, of how looking great on the pads. Yeah, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with looking pretty on the pads. But does it mean you're going to beat your opponent? Have a look at these videos right here. This is a video from 2012, right? Victor Ortiz on the pads. Victor Ortiz looks good on the pads. He keeps his shape. He brings his hands back to protect himself after he throws his punches. He's very sharp. His, feet are at a good position apart from each other. His balance is on point. Like, from a technical point of view, there's very little wrong. I'm not saying there's nothing wrong. That can be argued, right? But there's very little wrong with what Victor Ortiz is doing here from a technical point of view, from a boxing textbook point of view. Very little wrong with what he's doing. Same thing here with Adrian Broner, okay? With Broner, it's more the athletic and how impressive his athleticism is. And the way he's able to reel off these fast combinations and, transition between uppercuts and hooks to straight shots and jabs. You look at this little clip of him hitting the pads. It's impressive with the coordination, and it's all impressive, just like Ortiz's was for slightly different reasons. But guess what? Both of these guys fought this man right here, Marcos Maidana. Maidana in this pad session, he looked terrible. He looked slow, awkward, poorly coordinated. There's nothing that you see in this pad session with Marcos Maidana that would impress you. But yet he got in the ring and he battered both these men. Both of these men are more athletically gifted than Marcos Maidana. Technically, they're far more correct. They appear to make far fewer mistakes on the pads. But yet Maidana got in the ring and he battered both of them. Don't get it twisted. The Ortiz fight was a seesaw battle, but he got him in the end. And again, the point is, technique is not everything, particularly not technique on the pads. Because someone can have great technique on the pads. What happens when they get hit in the mouth? And an example of when Tyson Fury got hit in the mouth, the Steve Cunningham fight. Tyson Fury came out with the jab and the feints and all that kind of stuff in the Cunningham fight, right? He didn't intend to just go in there and bull forward with his arms up, in crude fashion. He didn't intend to do that from the first round. He was trying to get Steve Cunningham under control with a jab, trying to touch him from long distance, long right hands. That's what he was trying to do. But when he got hit in the mouth at the start of the second round, it went crashing to the canvas. He thought, you know what? I got to change my game plan. So all of that slick stuff that he was trying to do before, he realized it wasn't working against this opponent, So he had to go to plan B, which is just to march forward, lean on Cunningham, and just be the bigger, stronger man, and just use his physicality to defeat him, rather than trying to box with him. He felt like boxing with him was too dangerous. You see? So, Deontay Wilder, again, count the number of fights where Wilder's got hit a lot. He got hit with a few shots in one round against Luis Ortiz, the round when he was hurt. Other than that round, he wasn't really getting hit much. So there's the Ortiz fight, and what other fight did he catch a few shots? Maybe against Molina. But other than those two fights, has Wilder been getting hit a lot? He didn't get hit a lot against Washington. He didn't get hit a lot against Stavern. in either fight. He didn't get hit a lot against Spilka. He didn't get hit a lot. Actually, tell a lie. He did get hit by quite a few jabs from Johan Duopa. Not many power shots, but he did get hit by Duopa's jab, which swelled up his eye. But Duopa made a commitment, like Fury made the commitment in the Cunningham fight, to march forward and take a lot of punches from Deontay Wilder in order to get them jabs off. Now, in my mind, the only way Fury is going to be landed a lot of jabs on Wilder is if he does the same thing that Duopa did. March forward and, put pressure on him that way and be willing to take the right hand to land his jabs and land his own shots. If he fights that way, I think he's going to go the same way as Duopa. He's going to get knocked out fighting that way. So I don't expect Fury to fight that way unless he feels like it's the only way to win the fight and it's a last resort. Maybe he will go to plan B just like he did against Cunningham. But I'm not expecting him to come out in the first round and be doing that. I'm expecting Fury to be coming out in the first round and doing what he tried to do against Klitschko. And fighting the way he fought against Klitschko, I don't think he's going to be hitting Wilder with a lot of shots fighting that way. I don't. In fact, I think Tyson Fury will find Deontay Wilder pretty difficult to tag. With anything. I'm not saying he's not going to tag him. I'm saying he's going to find it pretty difficult. He's going to find Wilder awkward to tag. That's my intuition on it. And lastly, just to give you a few more examples here. This is Tyson Fury on the pads before the Klitschko fight. It was literally a couple days. It was fight week. Yeah. Fury again is unloading combinations. He's moving around a lot here, which was what he did in the fight. But there are moments where he stops and he unloads these fast combinations. When did he unload fast combinations on Vladimir Klitschko in their fight? He didn't. In fact, the shots that he did land, a lot of them looked quite clumsy. The jab was nice from Fury all the way through the Klitschko fight. But when he started trying to let his hands go, he looked quite clumsy against Klitschko. The shots were not fast and snappy and neatly delivered. A lot of them looked quite clumsy and cumbersome when he landed them on Klitschko. They still got home. They still hit the target at the end of the day. But most fighters don't look as pretty and well coordinated on the pads as they do in the ring when they're fighting somebody, particularly heavyweights. Most of them don't look anywhere near as pretty in the ring. And I'm not talking about aesthetically. I mean, their punches, their technique don't look anywhere near as pretty in the actual fight as it does when they're hitting the pads. Yeah? You go look at David Haye when he fought Bellew both times. He looked way better on the pads than he looked in the ring. Yeah? And vice versa. There are some guys who look horrible on the pads, some guys who look horrible on the bag, but when they get in the ring, they get the job done. A great example would be George Foreman. People still hold George Foreman up as one of the great heavyweight champions. Okay? George Foreman's technique looked ugly as hell. I'm telling you now that Deontay Wilder looks more technically sound when he hits the heavy bag than George Foreman did. Facts. But yet that didn't stop George Foreman from being the most feared man in boxing for several years. Yeah, I didn't stop him. Even though he looked horrible on the bag and his technique just looks very amateurish. His trainer would hold the bag and Foreman would often just throw one shot. And he's open. Look at this. Oh no, he's open. He's not bringing his hands back up to protect him. A lot of fighters have the wherewithal, top fighters, they have the wherewithal to not do things on the bag that they do in the ring when they're sparring or when they're fighting. Yeah? Some fighters, you do need them to bring their hands back up when they're hitting the bag. Because they don't have the situational awareness that a lot of other fighters do. But a lot of top fighters have the instincts and the situational awareness to understand, okay, I'm not hitting a bag right now. I'm in the ring with an opponent. So I need to be more careful about what I'm doing with my hands. I need to be careful about what distance I'm at. When I throw certain punches, I need to be careful about what I do after I've thrown a shot. And this is what you may not understand from watching somebody hit the bag or hit the pads. Yeah. There's something you may not be able to get from that because they're just in front of an inanimate object. If they're hitting the pads, you know, sorry, if they're hitting the bag, then they're in front of a trainer holding pads up. I mean, I've always felt to myself, how realistic are pads anyway? You got two separate targets which are being held in place for you to hit. No top level opponent is going to hold his head. Yeah, go on, hit me. 1-2 on my head, right? Like, it's not going to happen. You know, Chris Eubanks Sr. once said, and Chris Eubanks Sr. was a world level fighter. He wasn't the best super middleweight in the world or anything like that, but he was a world level fighter. He was a world champion and he fought a lot of top guys. And I remember Chris Eubanks Sr. saying that the most important part of training is sparring. And this is something James Toney also used to say. James Toney used to kind of look down upon people who spent too much time hitting the bag or hitting the pads. Yeah, you go watch James Toney interviews, you listen to what he says about training. And James Toney was a great fighter. He said sparring is by far the most important thing when it comes to boxing training, is the sparring. Not the pads, not the bag, not all that pretty stuff, but sparring. Because pads don't hit back. Bags don't hit back. You know? You learn to read the body language of your opponents through sparring. You learn to read situations through sparring. You know? When someone's going to throw a certain shot, you're watching for certain things. When you're on the bag, you're not doing that. When you're hitting the pads, you're not doing that. And so there are certain talents that fighters may have in terms of, again, situational awareness, which you won't realize they have until you see them trading blows with somebody in sparring or in the ring in a real fight. You won't be able to get it from watching them hit the bag or hit the pads. You understand? So again, people placing far too much emphasis on how they think Deontay Wilder looks on the pads. An example here in this video, Tyson Fury is throwing these rapid fire uppercuts and hooks, these short little pitty-patty punches, really. There's no real serious power on them. He's throwing these little short, fast punches on the pads with Ben Davison. Do you really think he's going to be able to get shots like that off against Deontay Wilder? I'm telling you now that he's not going to be able to. You're not going to see these fast, rapid shots. Tyson Fury himself knows that he's not going to be able to throw and land those fast, rapid shots on Deontay Wilder like that, like the ones he's throwing on the pad, say, with Ben Davison. What Tyson Fury is doing in this pad session is he's just loosening up and he's just trying to get his coordination flowing. That's what it's all about. He's not thinking, okay, yeah, Wilder's head is going to be at the same level as Ben Davison's pads and I'm going to be able to get off all these fast uppercuts. No. That's not what he's doing here. Here he's just loosening up, moving around, trying to get his coordination flowing, trying to get his rhythm, etc. Whereas Wilder in his pad session is trying to replicate more realistically what he thinks is going to happen in the fight. The kind of looks that Tyson Fury is going to give him and how he's going to respond, which is generally with single shots. The old 1-2 here and there, but primarily single shots. And interestingly, he's throwing quite a few uppercuts here. Yeah, in the eventuality, you know, in case Tyson Fury decides, you know what, I can't fight this guy at long range. If he's hurt me with a long right hand, let me come at him the way I did against Steve Cunningham. Deontay Wilder's got an uppercut waiting for him. So again, pad work is, there are many different types of pad work. Yeah. There are some pad sessions, like Golovkin, for example, where he will hit the pads or the punch shield. Sometimes they use this punch shield with Golovkin and other fighters. And he'll concentrate solely on power. He's not interested in throwing pretty flashy combinations. He is loading up and hitting that punch shield as hard as possible, George Foreman style. That's what Golovkin does in a lot of his pad sessions. Yeah? I've got footage on my channel of Golovkin hitting the pads. Not even the punch shield, hitting the pads. And Golovkin is loading up and throwing these big right hands over and over again. The same punch, not varying it. There are moments in that pad session I've got on my channel where Golovkin 3 or 4 times just throws right hand. That's all he does. It's muscle memory, training his body to be able to load up in a split second and land a powerful right hand. There is no one size fits all to training in boxing. See, people who are not as well versed in boxing training techniques as maybe veteran members of the boxing community, they think that there is a proper way to do pads and an improper way to do pads. No. There are many different ways to do pads, and not all techniques are going to suit every fighter. That's another thing you have to understand. I'll give you an example. The way Mike Tyson used to do pads with Kevin Rooney, that suited Mike Tyson. That suited his style. That suited what he was as a fighter. If you took Mike Tyson and had him doing the pads like Mayweather, where the trainer is slapping the pads on the gloves all the time. If you had that as the primary method of doing pads for Mike Tyson, it would not be effective. That's not right for Tyson. It worked for Floyd Mayweather, but there's plenty of other fighters who are wasting their time using that method as their primary method of doing pads. I'm not saying nobody should use that method, but what I'm saying is it's not going to be the best method for everybody. You have to find what works for you. You have to understand your body. You have to understand what you are as a fighter, what your strengths and weaknesses are. And of course, you can improve your weaknesses, but you're never going to be a specialist in certain areas. You have to know which areas you can be a specialist in and focus on emphasizing that, right? Of course, you try to tighten up where you can in areas that you're not great. But Mike Tyson was never going to be a slick back foot boxer, was he? So he didn't place too much emphasis on trying to learn slick back foot boxing techniques. Deontay Wilder is never going to be a guy who can reel off 10 punch combinations and then, spin out the pocket, and he's never going to be that fluid. So he concentrates on what he does well. Yeah? And again, in the pad sessions, he's focusing on trying to replicate the rhythm he's expecting from a Tyson Fury fight, where Fury's going to be waving hands in his face. And again, same with the Malik Scott, where he's moving around with Malik Scott. And Scott is giving him different looks. And again, people focusing on Scott's height. Oh, he's not as tall as Fury. This is nonsense. Malik Scott is one of his sparring partners. He's got other sparring partners who are as tall as Fury. In a training camp, you bring in multiple sparring partners. You don't bring in one guy. You bring in loads of guys. Some guys taller, some guys a little shorter. Malik Scott appears to be the guy in Wilder's training camp who stylistically is able to replicate Fury the most accurately. Malik Scott has been in training camp with Tyson Fury, by the way. I believe multiple times. So Malik Scott knows a bit about Fury from first-hand experience in the ring with him. And Malik Scott is a slick fighter. Yeah? So I just think people are going way overboard with their criticism of Wilder's technique and making out he's always rubbish and this, that, and the other. And as I've said so many times, for some reason, fans of particular fighters want to denigrate the fighter's opponents. But if you're denigrating Deontay Wilder, if you're putting him down, then why are you going to give Tyson Fury credit if he beats Deontay Wilder? And it's not only Fury fans who are denigrating Wilder. There's also a lot of AJ fans who are denigrating him in terms of his ability. And the same goes for them. what credit could you possibly give Anthony Joshua for beating Wilder since you say Wilder's so terrible? You know? What I'm saying is, if Tyson Fury beats Deontay Wilder, it is a fantastic and historically significant achievement in heavyweight boxing. That's what I'm saying. I'm going to give Tyson Fury massive credit if he beats Deontay Wilder. Yeah? Wilder is a dangerous hombre. Don't get it twisted. And anybody who tells you otherwise, boy, they're either out of touch with reality, or they're lying to you or lying to themselves, or both. This man is a dangerous hombre. Is he as skilled all round as Tyson Fury? Of course he's not. But he knows what he is. He's a long range sharpshooter. He's awkward. He's difficult to hit. Yes, Deontay Wilder is difficult to hit. Yeah? He's had 40 fights. Do you see a guy with a crooked nose or with cauliflower ears? You don't see that, do you? Because Wilder don't get hit that much. Look at Chris Arreola. Look at his face. Yeah? Wilder's not a guy who gets hit that much. So, anyway, I'm going to leave it there, people. Some people are going to say, oh no, Hatman, you're turning into a Wilder fan. No, I'm not turning into a Wilder fanboy. I'm objective. Yeah? So when I see people going overboard in one direction or the other, I'm going to speak on it. Do I still think Deontay Wilder is foolish at the negotiating table? Do I still think he is an emotional hillbilly? Hell yeah. But as a fighter, I think he's a good fighter. I think he's a dangerous fighter. And I think people are going way overboard in their criticisms of him. As if George Foreman didn't look horrible on the bag and on the pads. But when he got in the ring, he still beat the crap out of you though, innit? He's still fly ahead from here to Tokyo. Even if he is loading up and pulling it. You know, when Foreman hits the bag, he pulls this glove all the way back here and then hits the bag. Like, you couldn't telegraph your punches any more than George Foreman is when he's hitting the bag. But yet somehow he still manages to land the punches. On Joe Frazier, on Ken Norton, you know, on Ron Lyle. He still manages to land the shots. Even though when he's on the bag, he's telegraphing them from like 5 miles away. You understand what I'm telling you? It's not as simple as just looking at someone in the bag or the back. Oh, this guy's got no chance. It's not that simple. So, yeah, drop your comments in the comment section below. Let me know how you feel, people. It's Hatman, I'm out.